Oh, okay. So what's going on with them skies out there, man? Looking all crazy. The sky.
It well, like Central California is insane. Like the skies are on fire. Down here, it's just really gloomy, like gray, because there's so much ash. It's just kind of washing out the sunshine. It's weird.
Oh man, yeah, because I see they showed the. I know you in Southern California, but I saw that San Francisco Giants and Oakland Athletics, their arena, they stadium, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like blood red.
Yep.
Like what the
Yeah.
hell?
That's up in
So is it like
central
real
Northern
smoggy?
California. Really bad up
So is
there.
it like real smoggy and hard to breathe and all that?
Yeah, I some friends of mine were saying yesterday that they were noticing it. I haven't noticed it in my chest. I haven't felt it in my chest, but some of my friends have. So the air quality is really bad. But again, we're in Southern California, and these fires are in Central California. I mean, where are you at right now?
We in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, up north.
Okay, so you're in Wisconsin. Like California is massive, right? It's such a huge
Yeah.
state that those fires are hundreds and hundreds of miles away, and so there's still it's affecting our sky down here, but up there, I don't know how those people are breathing. San Francisco has like the city of San Francisco has like a blanket of dust on it from the ashes.
What?
Yeah, check it out. Go online and like look at San Francisco right now. It's wild.
So they burning up all the weed dispensaries.
All of that good California Humboldt is going up in flames.
Right, man. That's crazy. Well, we're glad you're here, Mr. Katie, online with us as well as retired Captain Andre Williams. And every other week we be doing this kind of dialogue where we talk about community police engagement. Um, I thought of you when that the Tupac anniversary thing came around on the 7th, and then you had posted something, and so I was like, you know what, that'd be a good way to reach out to you, and because you really solved this case. I mean, now you got a person to confess killing Tupac, man, and and in the hip hop side of things, that's crazy because before that, before you did that documentary, it was nothing close to a confession or nothing close to no type of solvency. And then not only that, you solved the Biggie case almost. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like now, so to me, for that to not get a straight up conviction or something like that, to me that shows some type of cogs in the game here, And when you did your other documentary and you talked about some of those cogs and some of those challenges to where you couldn't get a conviction, and then we look at everything that's going on in the world right now with all these protests, and these people to me got a legitimate gripe, you know. To me they got a legitimate gripe, and I just wanted to you and Andre to kind of talk, and let's talk about your career and what you experienced. I'm talking about from OJ Simpson case. I know you had to be around for that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like is some of this stuff really systemic when it comes to the law enforcement, or is people just overreacting, or a little bit of both? Because I'm pretty sure you heard about what's going on in Kenosha right now, Kenosha,
Yeah,
Wisconsin. We right down the street from that.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to share my own perceptions of things, throughout my career. I worked predominantly in South Central LA. It was predominantly a minority population. So I can certainly share my impressions and what my personal opinions are based on my experiences. So I'm happy to do that. Yeah. And I do think that it's interesting, we have to choose the lens by which we look at things. And sometimes time, time is an critical and important element. And we have to take that into consideration because we can't use the lens
Could you repeat the last part, what you were saying?
Hey, how are you, sir?
Oh, just great.
It's the first time I've seen you, so hello.
Oh,
Yeah, so I was just saying that I'm happy to share what my own personal opinions and my perceptions were based on my career and my experiences. But I was just also adding the caveat that, we have to be careful about the lens. We have to be honest about what lens we choose to see things through. And sometimes using the lens of today to evaluate an event of the past is not always the best way to do things, because time changes our conditions. And sometimes using a lens of the past to view events of today is likewise problematic. And so, when we were just talking right now, just quickly to give a better example of what I'm trying to say, is to think that because there's no prosecution in Tupac and Biggie's cases through the lens of today, it's not really an accurate way to see things when we look at the conditions and the times of when these events took place. And when you if you take that in consideration, I think things start to make a little bit more sense. I hope that made sense.
slightly. No, I do understand when you talk about, viewing the past through the lens of today, because people always, when they talk to other people, when they interact with other people, they look at the other people and basically think they should think how I think, and they should respond the same way I respond. But due to cultural differences, due to historical differences, that's not the case. So no, that part I understand without a doubt.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm happy to answer any questions and share my perceptions on things, and just, have a meaningful conversation with everybody on board. Cause I think this is the most important thing that can be taking place, is at least willingness to sit down and talk and be open. Regardless of whether we agree or not, just the mutual respect of having a conversation is lacking today.
Okay, well, I have some questions. Are you retired from Los Angeles?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the is his name Darden? Not Christopher Darden. Was it Darden?
Dorner.
There we go. That was
Yeah.
the officer who basically got frustrated to the point that things were not going his way, and then basically started putting together a hit list, a manifesto regarding the Los Angeles Police Department, some judges, some district attorneys, and things like that. And then I think he shot and killed one officer and his daughter.
He shot the family members of one of the captains that was on his board review. And so he actually had a vendetta against this administrator, that in his pursuit of getting him, he shot the daughter and son-in-law of that individual. So he killed two innocent people that were unrelated to the whole matter. And then he shot another police officer, during the manhunt.
Okay, right, and then in the end, right, they got him in the cabin, where he met his demise. Okay, the one thing, because again, when we talk about policing, especially here in Milwaukee, I just want to hear your perspective regarding race relations on the Los Angeles Police Department. Now, I don't know how long you've been retired, but when you were on, and even today.
Yeah. So when I came on, we went through a pretty exhaustive training. Los Angeles Police Department has probably one of the most intensive training programs in the country. And there was a lot of cultural diversity training. And I was exposed to an element that I had, and I didn't grow up in a minority based population. And so when I started to work in Los Angeles, I had the opportunity then to kind of get not integrated so much, but at least become aware of the different kind of cultural differences. You go to South Central LA, and there's a very strong Hispanic community. There's a very strong Black community, and they all have these really neat and unique cultural characteristics. And so I got to learn that, and it was really interesting because you get to see a different environment than the one that you were exposed to growing up. So I was really thankful that I had that opportunity. And then as the years went on and my career, evolved, then you kind of get to even a deeper and deeper and deeper understanding. And so I thought, I went through the riots, I went through the Rodney King thing. Of course, you mentioned the Dorner thing. We went through the OJ fiasco. And so all of those things brought different types of light on our department, the communities we policed. And I think we all were hopefully taking those opportunities to learn from our mistakes and to improve upon them. So that was always like my perception of things. Unfortunately, in my opinion, law enforcement is just always a little bit behind the curve. And although I think that we want to be the best, we want to provide the best service that we can, I always feel like law enforcement is a decade behind. Like the cops today want to do police work like they did in the generation before us. And, I remember being on the job and they're used as oh, that's old school. That's old school. And I remember, the cops that had different training and exposure and perceptions. We were trying to do the job that way. And that's where I think we go wrong as a police community, is that we're not in front of the game, we're behind the game.
Okay, that I would agree with that one. That's a very interesting insight as far as being behind the game, because they learn from the previous officers and they want to be like or emulate the previous officers, and therefore they're not actually embracing the here and now and the future of what law enforcement. They're still going back, trying to, and again, especially for minority communities, going back to the 70s and 60s isn't isn't the thing that how you want to police in the 2000s.
That's right. You're right. I agree with that. I've always said the guys in the 70s were a better group of police officers than the guys in the 60s. The guys in the 80s better than the 70s, the 90s better than the 80s. And, I think that we continuously improve, but I don't think we ever get fully ahead of the curve.
That's true. Because I would say that's symptomatic of Milwaukee police and probably, throughout the country, because there is definitely an underlying culture in policing, one that resists change. I mean, they don't want to change nothing, not unless, they're changing it, but they don't want to change anything. But you mentioned Rodney King. And one of the things, and this is a problem not only in Milwaukee, but I think it's law enforcement across the country. The one officer, actually it was about a couple officers that were actually beating Rodney King with the batons and things and so forth. But when it came time to basically for the officers to tell the truth or to turn in the other officers, there was that reluctance. And there goes the myth or the perception of a blue wall of silence. Now in Milwaukee, and I would assume it's also in Los Angeles and everywhere else, or maybe you've experienced it, where a good officer or an officer would do the right thing, tell the truth, turn in another officer regarding some bad behavior. Then that officer, the officer that did the turning in, becomes ostracized and blackballed by the other officers. And I used to do a roll call, and I explained to my officers several times as far as that's not the officer who actually turned in the officer that was doing something wrong. He was actually protecting the profession. The officer that did something wrong is the officer that you should be blackballing and ostracizing because he tarnished the profession. Do you experience that in LA?
To some degree. I mean, it becomes a kind of complicated conversation in the sense that, when you are out in the field and maybe you get into a situation where you think maybe your partner's gotten a little heavy-handed, a little bit, maybe we didn't have to go that hard. Maybe the use of force is justified, but there's a point where maybe, that it gets beyond justified, right? And, are you thinking, well, I'm a rookie officer. I've got my whole career at stake. Should I expose myself by, I don't know, I'm brand new on this job. Is there something I'm missing or misunderstanding? Because my perception is that this is too heavy. But you might keep your mouth shut because you don't know any better. And so therefore you fall into that trap of thinking, well, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut because I don't want to get, I don't want to stand out. I don't want to get, like to your term, ostracized. And then, but if you're a senior officer and then you're seeing that take place, then yeah, I think it's incumbent upon you to take a leadership role. Every cop should take a leadership role, but then you have to evaluate what's the best course of action. Is it minor enough to where you pull a guy aside and say, listen, I don't know what the fuck's going through your head right now, but you need to settle down and figure out if this is the way you think we should be doing that job? Or do you go to a supervisor and then create this big internal affairs investigation that, once internal affairs is involved, it goes in all kinds of different directions. And then maybe things get turned back on you. So there's a lot of variables that you work through mentally and psychologically during these things. But to answer the question directly, yeah, I think any misconduct has to be dealt with immediately. Then it's just a matter of what's the best and most appropriate course of action for it.
Okay. I'm gonna let everybody else ask some questions here.
It looks like we do have a couple questions in the chat. It says, how are officers assigned jobs? Is it whoever is closest to the action, or are skill sets considered?
That's actually that's a great question. And the answer is going to be, it's completely it depends. You can get a job that you're totally unqualified for just because of who you know on the job. Maybe you've got an uncle that's a captain, or maybe you've got so there are guys that get assignments that they are not necessarily qualified for just because of nepotism and that type of thing. And then you've also got guys that just are really qualified for the job, and they apply for it and they compete for it, and then they're chosen for it. And of course, there's all kinds of other things that come into question. We have quotas and stuff like that we need to assure to maintain a perception that we're fair. You've got to have balance in the police department. So although you've got a unit of 10 guys, maybe you need a female in that unit. And so you need to put a little bit more emphasis on promoting some girls into that unit, or people of color, whatever it might be. So all of these things play a part, but there are times when people that are completely unqualified for a job get a job just because of who they know.
Next question is, why do you think they are behind the game? You had said that you feel like the police officers, like every time, are behind the game. Why do you think they are behind?
Well, one of the reasons goes back to what your co-host just said, and it's about resistance to change. And we do, as a law enforcement community, are a little bit reluctant and hesitant to change. Like, for whatever reason, change is something that has to be sometimes forced upon us. And I don't know why that is. I can't speak as to why that is, but it is actually, I think, a contributing factor. But there's, like, police work was fun. And now it's not fun. Like, guys out there are like worried about getting sued. They're worried about whether they're going to go home. It wasn't always this way. Like, when I was a street cop, we used to go out and have a lot of fun. It was just you'd have partners, you'd run around, you chase people. It was actually a fun job to have. and we did it well for the most part. I mean, we all had our, mistakes that we've made in our careers, and we look back and wish we'd have maybe done some things differently, but it lost that element of being a job that you were respected and admired for doing. You had community support, and I don't think that it's that way anymore. And so I think people go, wow, I wish it was back the way it was. So that's, to some degree, I think that that's why people go, well, the generation before us, doing police work their way, it was just more fun.
Okay, another question is, this is for Greg. Do you think that the persona that is portrayed of the LAPD is accurate? When I say the persona portrayed, I mean that they are in the biggest gang in the country, that they will do anything and everything to try and prove everyone that they can't be touched. Most of the time, LAPD is portrayed to have so much corruption in it, no more like how the time, no matter how the times have changed.
Yeah, and I have to completely and wholly disagree with that perception. Uh, Not at all. We're a huge organization, and so we're going to have bad apples. At one time we're 10,000 strong, and we're going to have some people that either came on the job with the wrong motivation and the wrong purpose, or somehow throughout their career they're influenced to make bad decisions and to do wrong. But it's such a minute percentage. It's so small. The vast majority of guys, like myself, want to go out and do a good job. We want people to appreciate us. We want to keep people safe. We want to come to your house and have you be thankful for us being there. We're not trying to create problems, but we are dealing oftentimes with a criminal element which inherently brings conflict. There's always going to be conflict as long as law and order is opposed to lawlessness. And those things are going to collide, and sometimes they get violence, and violence always looks bad. And so, I would completely disagree with this idea that we're a gang, because by definition, a gang is a criminal organization, where people come together to commit crimes. Well, that's not what the LAPD is doing. The LAPD is coming together to combat crime. And so that definition doesn't work. And for all intent and purposes, I think it's a misperception. And I think through dialogue and understanding, like, go on some ride-alongs. That guy that's asking that question, or girl that's asking that question, she should go on some ride-alongs with her local police department. And the bigger the department, the better, because she'll be exposed to more things. And go out there and allow yourself to see things through the eyes of an officer. Get immersed into a culture that you don't know anything about in order to maybe understand the approach of that culture. So I would just offer that, because if you, that's the only way we're ever going to come to the middle ground, is to look at things through each other's eyes.
All right. Next question is, oh, I'm sorry. Can't hear you. You're muted.
You're talking to Greg?
Talking to Craig.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you think Donald Trump is egging on police officers with this law and order campaign that he's doing, and he's kind of amping up police officers with stop and frisk and all of this extra stuff that treads the line of excessive force?
Well, it's gotten so incredibly aggravated out in the streets. Things are so aggravated. And by the way, you can go back and look at Democratic presidential campaigns, like Obama or Clinton. Their platforms were law and order. So you go back and you look, and they were like law and order and borders and walls, and so all these things are not unique to President Trump, but because there's so much vitriol towards him, we make them unique to him. But you go back and look at the campaign speeches of the other platforms that people, they were identical. So there's that. But I do think he lacks in tact. There's no doubt about it. That's the one thing President Trump, you know, he's not a polished politician by any means, and he speaks sometimes without thinking, and that rubs people the wrong way and gives it gives misunderstandings and false impressions. But I am with strong law and order. I believe you have to have it, especially when shit's getting burned down all over and people are being beaten up and stores are being looted and business owners are losing their entire livelihood. These are all innocent people, and who's going to protect them if it's not law enforcement?
Is there a way to go about it though? Is there a better way to go about it than antagonizing people showing up in riot gear, tanks, and like looking threatening, looking imposing, and bringing National Guard? Do you really think that's cause for?
Well, I would only answer it like this. I would just say, what's the picture that we see when that doesn't happen? Let's look at Portland's, and let's look at Seattle's, and let's look at Chicago's, and look at what's happening when there's not a strong paramilitary force there. Man, there you lose control. And if this is my opinion, I think that lawlessness that's taking place in these cities is, how far do you let it go before you have to actually respond with some type of effective, aggressive counterforce?
Hi, this is Veronica. I would like to know, say you were in charge of the LAPD or any police department, how would you address the racism? The 4 times being stopped while black,
Mm-hmm.
if you get stopped, you might get killed. You personally, how would you, as I'm saying, a white man, in charge of a department, combat that racism?
I would actually put a whole lot more emphasis on community discussions, and not the community discussions where the community comes to you at town hall or at a high school auditorium where civic leaders will come and attend. I think that you have to take it into the neighborhoods. I think those conversations have to be aggressively taken into the neighborhoods, and having conversations and talking to people who have those perceptions. Go talk to the guy that got stopped 4 times, who thinks he was stopped because he's a person of color, or talk to him and allow him to speak. Like, listen to him, feel him, understand what he's saying, but then ask him to do the same. Say, because I can tell you, I very rarely did I know the race of a person I'm stopping if I'm behind a car. I run a license plate, I see a violation, but the person who's driving, let's just say it's an African-American teenager, and I pull him over. He thinks he's getting stopped for being black. I don't even know until I get up to the window. And so, these are some of the things we have to talk about in order to create a balance. Like, I will see things through your eyes, and I don't want you to be scared. But I want you to know that I have a reason to maybe be frightened too. I don't know what I'm walking up on. I have no idea. We had 160 officers killed this year already in this country. 160, with a disproportionate number of those officers being minorities, people of color, Black, Hispanic, and I think 10 females. And so, cops have a reason to be a little bit apprehensive, and maybe they want to take control of the situation as quickly as they can, because that's in everybody's best interest. And so I think a person, even if they think that they're being stopped for being black, don't be aggravating, or I'm sorry, don't aggravate the situation. Just comply. Just say, okay, can you tell me why you stopped me? Okay, I understand. I disagree, but what do we need to do from here? Try to do the de-escalation. And if everybody's doing that, if everyone's trying to de-escalate, then then it shouldn't escalate. But we all want to, we're competing against each other, and we shouldn't.
In Kenosha, the guy gets shot 7 times. Do you think what you think about that? 7 times he shot that man. Do you think that was necessary?
I have
walking
to be,
away. He got shot in his back.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on something that I'm not really informed about. I'm aware of the incident. I believe this is just what I know, and I'll try to explain it just from the limited information I have, is that he had violated a restraining order for some type of sexual assault. I think it was on a ex-wife or a estranged wife. And so he violated a restraining order, and they knew that going in. And so they wanted to enforce that, but then it becomes a situation where it's uncooperative. Mistake number 1, just comply. You're never going to win that fight. So it doesn't do any matter. You know, if you're in violation of a restraining order, whatever it is, there's a better way to go about that than to resist, right? The cops are just enforcing.
He was walking away.
That's not walking away after you've already had a confrontation. That's not walking away. That's resisting. Okay, they already wanted to put handcuffs on him. So walking away when you've already been asked to turn around, put your hands behind your back is not walking away. It's resisting. Legally, like from a legal perspective, that's what the cops are seeing it that way. And I'm not trying to justify. Oh, by the way,
asked our Captain Andre this. He said,
"Hey, partner, you're breaking up just like you're."
Yeah, Craig, you're breaking up. I got a quick question on that.
Okay, I said our Captain Andre. He said he would have did the tackle technique. He would have tackled him. He would.
Right.
It wouldn't have got to the point where he pulled a weapon.
Yeah.
Well, from what I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, but you know, because right now it really depends, and that's why, you know, before people start reacting to everything, all the facts got to come out first.
Right.
Because now they're saying he had a knife. If he had a knife, I wouldn't have tackled him because he has a knife, and that would explain why the officers had their gun on him and following behind him because they wanted him to drop the knife. But again, if he did not have a knife, he wouldn't have made it to the car. It would have been okay. He's getting tackled right then and there. But a lot of this stuff, you know, people are you know, jumping to conclusions about things, and it's okay to speculate because that's what we're supposed to. That's what we do. We see something and we try to guess what's happening or what happened. But when you start taking all of the rumors and you start taking all of the hearsay as fact and react to it as it is fact, when the actual truth comes out, you look kind of you know, messed up. You then don't want to believe it because you want to believe your own set of facts, which is not. It's not facts. You're just believing the narrative. You're believing all this other stuff. So right. Yes, if he had a knife, I wouldn't have tackled him. Simple as that. We were walking around to the car. If I believed my life was in danger at that point, would I would have shot him? Yes. Now, you know, people say, well, do you have to shoot him 7 times? Where there's this thing, what we do is called, you know, actually shoot until the person stops doing whatever they're doing that made us feel threatened in the first place. So, you know, 7 is that a overkill? Maybe. And that's another thing that's going to come out as far as when they interview and they put together this whole entire case of, okay, why'd you shoot 7 times? But you gotta wait for it.
Hey, I have a question, Cap. I'd like to get your opinion about something that I've always struggled with. You know, let's take that scenario, and where a guy's got his back to you, he's reaching in a car, And although you may have that, perhaps if he already had a knife and that's why you didn't tackle him or whatever, I guess a taser wasn't employed or deployed. I would like to get your opinion on this, because it's something I've always felt and have been curious why we don't do this under very specific circumstances. If his back's to you and he's reaching in a car and you're behind him and you're kind of in a position of advantage, why not shoot him in the ass or in the legs? Put 4 bullets in his ass or in his legs, and give yourself that little extra opportunity to see what he's doing without killing him.
Right.
I know a lot of cops are gonna, fry me for this, but honestly, why not?
All right, here's why. Number one, the reason that basically we shoot to stop you from doing whatever you're doing that caused us the threat. Number one, if I shoot you in the butt, that means I wasn't afraid of what you were doing. If I purposely aimed to shoot you in your leg or your butt, that means I wasn't shooting because I was scared for my life. I was shooting to slow you down or do whatever. Number two, I think I explained this one on here before. I had a guy, long story short, I'm walking the beat, car flies by me. I see some guy in the street yelling, and I knew something was up. Me being a runner, chaser, that's what I do. I used to do. Knees bad now. Can't do it no more. I take off, chasing this car. I go southbound on 42nd Street from Garfield, because I see the car go southbound on like 38, 37. I'm trying to get to the next corner before this car so I can broadcast which direction this car is going. Some guy comes around the corner. I'm looking for a car. I see this guy, don't really pay any attention to him. He turns around and starts shooting at me under his arm, running away from me. So if I would have hit him, I fired back at him, I missed. But if I would have hit him, I would have hit him in the back. And people would have been like, why you shooting him back? He was running away from you. You clearly shot him in the back. This dude was shooting at me from under his arm while he's running away from me. Turns out the car had came back on Garfield towards and stopped right around the corner of the house. So I'm on the front of the house, the car's on the side of the house, and he got out and came around the corner. So we met right at the corner. But I wasn't looking for a guy, I was looking for a car. And that's why he was shooting, he saw the police. So again, back to the original question, why don't we do that? Is because mainly is if you're fearing for your life, you don't shoot a person like in the arm or the leg, because that won't stop them from doing what they're going to do. So that's why most officers can't shoot. So they aim center mass.
That's the best answer right there.
They aim center mass because now you have the best chance of hitting the person.
That's right. Yeah, you're right.
I'm not letting y'all get away with that. I'm not letting y'all get away with that, because I can't let y'all get away with that because cops and fear don't go hand in hand to me. Like you always got an advantage over me in the street, because most of the time we don't have weapons. Y'all got the pistol, the taser, the nightstick, bulletproof vest.
Right.
Most people y'all encounter on the street not gonna have it.
Yeah, if you think we don't get scared, man, I think that I can only tell you that you're wrong, man. It's frightening sometimes. And you don't know if somebody has a gun or not. You know you don't have a gun, but I don't know you don't have a gun.
Yep, and that's the truth right there. We don't know what the person has.
Yeah.
When they start resisting and start doing things other than what we're saying, that just makes us even more nervous, because it's like, okay, why aren't you doing, take your hands out your pockets? Very simple, no problem. And then you'd be like, no. For me as the officer, I'm like, well, why wouldn't he take his hand out of his pocket? It's a simple request. That must be something else is going on. Uh-oh, I got to be ready, because this dude's about to do something. All these things start to, go through a person's head. We're human, just like you.
So all this training, all of this prepping y'all do in the academy,
Hey, Craig.
Get mentally prepared. Y'all not that y'all still scared when y'all actually on the street.
Hey, that's my point. Like the news, that Kenosha part was the news spun that out. But I was wondering, shouldn't y'all hand to hand and all the other combat should be so superior, or is it just it's not adequate enough training? Do you think that should change? That
Oh
like
my,
how when he was walking to the car, I think those 3 cops could have took him before he got to that car. That was my whole thing. I think you actually could have took him.
but
The question
do those cops know how trained he is? Do they know if he's an expert knife fighter? Do they know what he knows? So they don't. And so the cops are always trying to maintain the best position of advantage that they can, whether it's numbers or through their equipment. The training, really, we're not hand-to-hand combat guys. We get a few weeks of, wrestling and maybe a little bit of grappling in the academy, and then you start eating donuts. And, so we aren't.
Should it be that way though? Should it be that way? Shouldn't it be more?
No, it should not. I agree with you. I think the physical training standards in law enforcement should be military. Like you should be always working out, staying in shape, because the better shape you are, the less fearful you'll be.
True. That was my.
And not
Hey,
and
wait,
not
one
only that.
wait, one thing. Okay, you were saying, you don't think a police officer should be afraid, right? How many of you right now, we're all talking on Zoom. It's no big thing. We're having a big conversation. Right now, if they said, okay, I want you to go and talk in an auditorium with about 600 people about your life, are you going to be nervous? Are you going to be afraid? Now, we talk all the time. That's
unless you're a good public speaker, other than that, probably.
But as soon as they say, go and talk in front of these 600 people, everybody, wait. I don't want to talk in front of 600 people. So when you look at it like that, and say, the officer, like, okay, I get my training. Now I'm going to go in somebody's house and I'm going to start talking and trying to mediate an argument, break up a fight. I'm going to do all these things.
Right.
And the only thing I had was the training. The training don't say, okay, this person in there, the kids in the room crying, there's a dog barking, there's, this person over here yelling and cussing, and if one person pacing back and forth, it kind of gets you unnerved a little bit.
And
y'all do wear a lot of hats. There's a lot of hats to wear. You have to be social work. You have to be a lot, though. I mean, I give you all that. It's a lot.
And that was going to be
Greg,
my next question.
We talked to our captain about this too. Talk to our captain about this too. What's your thoughts about defunding the police, Greg?
Well, I think the community will suffer. Now, I get like so I'm actually gonna probably contradict myself here. I believe that there is monies that go towards frivolous things that within the city government, law enforcement, that can be better reallocated towards community programs. So if defunding the police means reevaluating where the money's going, and if it's not used effectively and responsibly, put that money somewhere else. No problem with that, if that's what defunding means. But if defunding the police means like reduce their budget so they don't have the equipment they need, they don't get the training they need, they don't have the budget they need to work extra hours in order to pursue investigations, then this community suffers more than anybody. It's not the cops that are going to suffer, it's the community that's going to suffer. They're not going to get the service that they expect and
you can grab the
deserve.
stuff that you want.
Okay. How much of those funds goes to like the detective, like to the investigation part of it? Does more money goes to the investigation or to the cops?
All departments are probably different the way they allocate their money. Like a large department with the LAPD, with as a huge budget, a lot of it goes towards patrol services. a lot of it goes towards investigative services. Other stuff goes towards all the other, it's huge, the transportation services, blah, blah, blah. So you just have to be responsible and really fiscally responsible, because there is a lot of waste. I can tell you, with a department like the LAPD, we would sit around, I'd be like, what a waste of fucking money, And so I think there just has to be accountability, but that doesn't mean defunding.
Right.
Okay, I would like to know how much training go into, psychological training, based on, there was at least 2 guys that got killed, and they were having a mental episode where they needed help, hospital or something, and they ended up dead, because I feel that the cops didn't have enough compassion or sympathy or even training to know that he was in trouble.
Yeah. So cops are trained to immediately try to take control of a situation. If a person's a danger to themselves or a danger to others, then the cops are trained to try to get control of that as quickly as possible. And they don't have extensive, mental health training. It's not what we're there for. We're there essentially for law enforcement. But yeah, I think that we can always be a little bit more empathetic, in that if there's an emphasis on that, reevaluating. But at the same time, I'll tell you, this goes back to our earlier discussion about being afraid. Probably the scariest I've ever been is with a person who's completely mentally ill, or a person who's under the influence of PCP. Those are the times when I thought, this person is like, if we don't get control of this individual immediately, then who knows what's going to happen. But those were like frightening situations. Mentally ill people are so unstable, and you don't know what they're capable of. And if you don't immediately, control that, then you're allowing him to control you.
So let me ask you this. Is that something that you want to be in charge of? Wouldn't you rather have that being somewhere where somebody else is maybe a little bit more adaptable to that type of situation? Because to me personally, I feel like for police officers, I feel like that's a responsibility that y'all shouldn't have to have. It should go on to somebody else who can better navigate that situation a little bit more, where you can just say, hey, look, here's this person. Now, you will be more or less like the backup if something really got up out of hand. But I think that because y'all already in high tense situations, I feel like y'all should be saying, hey, look, I don't want to deal with that type of stuff. Let somebody else deal with this.
I don't want to hijack the answers, so I can defer to the captain, because is the captain a regular guest?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to just sit here and just keep talking. So I can defer, or I can give an opinion about that. I don't personally.
I want both of y'all to answer that one, though. I want both of y'all to answer that.
The captain's more articulate. Let him go first.
Wait, first, what is the question first?
Well, the question is, wouldn't you rather have funds that are more adaptable for someone, or using the funds to go somewhere else, as far as like the situation where you have a mental health person who has issues? Wouldn't you rather have somebody else deal with that versus having that stress onto you? You know how you say, like, you're going into a situation where I'll take the situation where the guy was on the ground who has a mental health issue. They put the bag over his head because he said he had COVID, and then all of a sudden he passes away. Where certain people who have mental health issues, if I feel like that burden needs to be off of y'all, it needs to go to somebody else who's a little bit more trained for dealing with people who have mental health issues.
My man. Oh, I can say this. Number one, yes.
How-
If
how-
you're
how
going to take that
escalated
money
the
and
situation.
reallocate it, because right now, when people say defund the police and take money and put it elsewhere, right now, the mental health services in Wisconsin and specifically in Milwaukee are not, do not have the capacity to deal with the number of mental health calls that the Milwaukee Police Department receives, and I'm sure the same thing in LA. They don't have the capacity. So right now, if they said, starting today, we're going to direct all these calls to mental health professionals to deal with it, which is logical, except the fact that they don't have enough people to actually deal with. They don't have enough facilities to deal with the number of calls that take place. So that's something that has to be built up to, because again, there was a lot of mental health services that closed down. Now the only mental health facilities at county. So, so basically, to answer your question, that would be nice. I would love to see how that occurs. But you know, mental health calls, we get them daily. I mean, just repeatedly, because even when the person isn't on medication, sometimes it's undiagnosed mental health issues. Sometimes it's drug-induced mental health issues. There's a lot of things going on there. So I don't, because even now, mental health, if the person is violent or whatever, they still call us.
Okay.
Question.
Well, see, I got one last little thing. I'm sorry. Okay. And I personally, I have an issue with defund. It's just a bad word to me. To me, I feel like it needs to be something else. It's not that I don't feel like Black people don't want protection. I don't feel like Black people don't want that. It's just how to conduct yourself as an officer
Accountability.
when you're out on the street. I feel like, hey, why is there so much hostility that goes towards people of color more than others? Like, there needs to be some type of social training, some real social training, you know. And like he said earlier, okay, taking the funds and, you know, more training about how to do certain things, more training on de-escalating certain situations. I just feel like it needs to be allocated in a way that it will help us, not bring us down, or, you know, and continue the violence and everything else that goes with that. Because it's been over what oppression has been for 16, 19, since the day we came from out of bondage, you know, here in America. So it's just something that I feel that needs to change in that regards. Okay, that's it.
Okay, I have a question. So I'm going to school for mental health, and by the time I'm done, it's 6 years of training. Why aren't police officers who have guns, why aren't they trained as long as I am, and I don't have a gun?
Well,
Well,
could you?
here in Wisconsin, let me just answer this real quick. To get a gun in Wisconsin, you only need to go to 4 hours worth of training, and you ain't even got to fire it to get your.
Well, like, as like a mental health professional, like if I'm sitting in an office with a patient who is like really ill, I don't have a gun to protect myself if they attack me.
So I'm wondering, what is your argument, that you should have a gun, or is your argument that the cops just need more training because they have guns?
More training. Like, how much training do you guys get for like de-escalating situations? I guess I don't know, like, the training.
Yeah. Well, we have to keep this within a practical, you know, a practical realm. We can't send cops to mental health training for 6 years, you know, in order to get the expertise they need in order to deal with all the different variables of mental health evaluations and treatment. So we can't, and that's not what that's not what our job description is. Our job description is enforcing the law. And so mental health is just a component that it just kind of somehow, you know, it becomes a variable within the job description. And so we can only address it as a variable and not as a objective.
Okay.
Because it's not what we are, that's just not the nature of what we do. But we do need to be better at it because it is such a problem in this country, right? And the captains, what I love being on this with the captain is the captain sees things from an administrative perspective more than I do, because I was never an administrator. He was. And so he can see things from the more pragmatic approach of how this works. I wish that all cops were more empathetic. And that's what the training needs to be, whether it's mental health, drug abuse, all of these things. I think that we lack empathy to a certain degree. And so I would emphasize that we really need to teach cops how to get outside of their own lifestyles, backgrounds, understandings, and just be more willing to open up. And then couple that with the captain's practical perspectives of application.
So that leads us into the next question, actually. How many, actually, that one was kind of that was asked a little bit before, but give me a second. Let me go to this question really quickly. How many officers in the LAPD struggle with depression or trauma? And how often are the LAPD receiving annual mental health assessments?
So this is an interesting question because it brings us into the kind of psychological mindset of a cop. And most cops may, or, because it's a kind of a, what's the term I'm looking for? Cops don't like to think that they have weaknesses. We aren't really good at that. We don't really self-evaluate well, in my opinion. And so therefore we may not recognize whatever, some of the psychological conditions that we might be suffering from, because we've already masked that with that we're not vulnerable and that we don't have that problem and we don't have that weakness. So I think that that's a great question, because I don't think that we properly self-evaluate oftentimes. But with that being said, of all the people I know in the LAPD and all the people that I worked with in our department, mental health issues were not a considerable concern. Most of us do well, we do our jobs well, and we go home feeling relatively good about the way that we've, conducted ourselves. So I don't think mental health is an issue within law enforcement, but at the same time, I think that we also become alcohol abusers, and, we've got our fair share of domestic violence, and we have our fair share of prescription drugs, because that's masking some problem that we haven't dealt with.
So can I ask you this? Do you feel that officers, like in the military, they have PTSD and other symptoms? Because it's like going to war, you see things that nobody else sees. The average human or resident or so doesn't see a dead body 24/7. No one sees a woman or man or whatever beat up and so on. And after a while, that messes with your psyche. So do you feel like at some point there needs to be, after a week or two or whatever, like there needs to be some type of mental training, or like just to talk and just kind of, say, hey, look, this is what happened, so you can talk with fellow officers and just kind of get the stress out? Because if you're not talking about it, it's pent up. And like you were just saying, you have alcohol abuse, you have all these other mental health issues, and you're not letting it escape. And therefore, those pressures eventually go on to, hey, if I meet this guy, I'm going to whip the shit up out of him. It's not to be like, hey, look, I'm racist or I'm whatever. At some point, hey, somebody else is going to take this whipping that I've seen over and over and over again. Somebody's going to get an ass whipping, point blank.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair question.
Can I answer the question? I'm a licensed therapist, and I've sit and heard you guys talk about mental health. So I've been doing this about 15 years. And so when we look at depression, when we look at trauma, we look for behaviors. And we're talking about behaviors, we're talking about mood changes. When we're talking about Milwaukee County, first of all, you have to understand that the police officers cannot make anyone get any type of help for mental health. They have to go in voluntarily based on the HIPAA laws. So if we want to make that change, we have to change the federal laws. We can,
except for Chapter 51.
Yep. So, and in order to do a Chapter 51, the police officer may initiate it, but you have to have at least 3 family members. And the hard part about that is the family members don't want to force their loved ones to get care out of guilt and shame, because the family members themselves are what we call codependents, and they enable the family members. They enable the person for getting help, because 9 times out of 10, they say that the medication is going to change their personality. But when we talk about any type of mental health, their normal behavior hasn't been normal for such a long time. You don't recognize what the person should be anymore. So if I have a person that's been struggling with depression or anxiety, and he's been doing it for 15 years, and he's been self-medicating, what does he look like 15 years prior? Most people can't remember things that happened to them in the last 48 hours. So when we talk about having the police officers being able to assist people with mental health, it's a challenge, but we do have some clinics that do partnerships with different police stations to be able to assist them. So they have clinicians that come on call. You also have Rogers Memorial is where I work at. I'm also in private practice. You also have Aurora and Dewey, St. Luke, St. Francis. Those are places, along with Columbia St. Mary's, that they can go to receive inpatient treatment. But once they go into inpatient treatment and they don't continue services, the cycle continues. So then they have more altercations with the police officers. And so in order to make a person or require them to receive treatment, you have to have the documentation. And documentation for any psychiatrist or doctor insurance to be able to service them has to be at least 3 to 5 years of consistent treatment. So the questions that y'all asking, they're valid questions, but the people have to be voluntarily to go in and actually want to get help.
My question to the therapist, and we run out of time. Hopefully, Mr. Greg can answer the remaining questions in the chat. But my question to the therapist is this: do you think that most people that grew up in the inner city is already dealing with some type of mental health issue just on the strength of the conditions of living in the inner city?
Yep, that's what we would call a social learning environment, social living environment. Yes, you do have a majority of your people that come from poverty do have a high of mental illness, normally depression and anxiety, and within those communities, a lot of people, they have their own myths about mental health. So they say they will self-medicate. And self-medicate mean any type of substance. The biggest self-medication that we see within the African-American community, starting at the age of 11 years old, is marijuana. They start off with marijuana. Whether it's ADHD, depression, anxiety, the first substance of choice is marijuana. And a lot of times we have family members that say, oh, that's just their personality. They're just an upbeat person. So they begin to use any type of substance to self-medicate, and then they move on to something higher. So that's why we refer to marijuana as a gateway drug, because it leads to a different substance, because after a while, it doesn't give you the feeling it used to give you, because your body has become numb to it.
Right. Makes sense.
When it comes to a encounter, hold up. So I was going somewhere with that, Mr. Greg. So when it comes to an encounter between a police officer, who would you think would be more afraid in that situation? A person who already just dealing with issues of life, being in the inner city, or somebody who should be trained and should have some understanding of the environment they working in if they living in a so-called bad area.
I think it's a balance. I think that there needs to be a partnership. There needs to be a partnership with providers and along with the police departments in any state. I believe it's also opportunity for it's a teachable moment where even the police officer can just have general questions to be able to ask a person. So normally, if a person is having a breakdown, we would normally direct our clients to dial 911 and ask for a safety check. So a safety check would kind of let a person know, let the officers know that they're kind of like they're not in a good place right now. So to be aware, be cautious that they need to take to get some inpatient services to get them to be able to be stable. So I think it's a teachable moment. I believe that it should be where we build partnership with the police department with different clinicians and different organizations, so they would be knowledgeable enough just to ask the basic questions. And the basic question could be, do you feel safe? So what agitated you today? What, just simple questions. How was your mood? What changed your mood? Before anything else can kind of explode. So we just want to be able to have those moments where we can just give and provide them with some type of simple questions that they can ask, and they can be safe, and then the resident can be safe too.
Great question. Great conversation on the mental health. I do want to ask a few questions. It looks like the question was answered by Mr. Andre. Question was, do you think that Breonna Taylor's situation could have been handled differently? Do you think that Louisville, Kentucky Police Department or whoever did enough or is doing enough to make sure she gets justice and make sure it never happens again? Is the law not to do no-knock warrants enough? And Andre answered, unfortunately, this is a horrible mistake. Yes, it could have been handled differently. This entire incident needs to be looked at from the time that they filed the report to get the warrant till the time they shot her to death. Their no-knock warrant procedures need to be seriously reviewed. Did you want to expand on that, Andre?
Well, basically, when it comes to those no-knock warrants, I think a lot of judges and police departments apply for it. It's almost like they want it to be no-knock just because for the element of surprise, but you don't need that all the time. No-knocks are usually for the prevention of, evidence being destroyed or the person mounting some defense to you. So that's usually when a no-knock is granted, and they have to justify that in the warrant. But it's gotten to be that, they ask for no knock for anything, and that's not acceptable. It needs to be reviewed and looked at so that in this case where she was shot in her house after they kicked in the door, from her perspective, she's looking at as intruders coming into the house, and the police are looking at like they're getting shot at by somebody. But it could have been handled differently. It could have been handled a lot differently.
Next question is there an awareness that police violence is an issue, or is it dismissed as an attack on the police department by people with politically correct agendas? In many recent cases of police shootings, the police body cameras have either malfunctioned or turned off, or the content have gone missing. What are the steps you're taking to ensure that this doesn't happen within the department? And both of you are retired or no longer working, so answer as best as you can.
I would defer to Andre because Andre's an administrator, so he's in a better position to talk about what procedures take place within a large department, about accountability and making sure that the checks and balances all weigh out, more so than I would.
Well, what's your thought as just a human? What's your human response to
I don't think that there's that much malfeasance going on. I don't think that there's all of these guys that are out there, you know, closing doors and going, all right, fuck, let's figure out how to erase this video camera because I don't like what's on it. You know, there's a lot of checks and balances, and the cops are aware of that. It's a very difficult thing to do, to be, you know, that criminally sophisticated to cover these things up. It just, it's not practically possible anymore. And so although the public perception might be that, yeah, that must happen all the time, it's not, and it doesn't. And I think Andre will expound upon that better than I can.
First, regarding the body cameras, yeah, as Greg was saying, it's hard to, you know, basically hide the video or lose the video. Usually what happens, you know, a lot of these departments, especially the smaller ones, they don't have body cameras. Like down in Kenosha, they don't have body cameras. So people are asking, where are the body cameras? They don't actually have body cameras. Not Kenosha, I'm sorry, Wauwatosa, they didn't have body cameras. They had the shooting in the park, that was from the dash cam, but they didn't have actual body cameras. So when, you know, the Milwaukee Police Department, when if we're looking for video from an incident and you didn't turn on, because the officers have to turn on their video to actually start the recording. If the officer doesn't turn on their video, okay, there's a problem. There's a rule that says you must turn on your video anytime you're interacting with the public. But if the officer doesn't, then they're subject to discipline. So that kind of, hopefully that answers that question. And we review officers' video at random, but most of the video that's get reviewed is when a citizen make a complaint or somebody questions something. So the first thing we do is go back and grab that video. As far as, is there awareness that the police violence is an issue, or is it dismissed as an attack on the police department by people with a political correct agenda? You know, it's kind of both, because really, violence, you know, when we talk about all these police shootings and police violence, police shooting is a rare event compared to how often we interact with people on a regular basis. It's really minuscule. But what happens is every time there's a shooting somewhere in this country, it all gets put together like this is happening on a regular basis and people are getting shot by the police all the time. Well, it's rare, number one, that someone gets shot, like for example, in the city of Milwaukee. I'm sure it may happen more often in Los Angeles simply because of their size, not because they're just they're more likely to shoot someone. Now, could there be, should this be looked at? Yes, of course. Anytime we want, and Greg had mentioned it earlier, we want to do our jobs, we want to do it the best that we can. And if there's a perception that we're doing it wrong, or we're using violence, or more often than we should, then yes, we need to look at that to either, hey, listen, no, it's, you know, to re-educate the public, and as far as it's not occurring as often as you think, at least with your department, or to show exactly why we use it in the circumstances that we use it. See, I always believe that, you know, we get our power from the public. The public grants us this awesome authority to use force, to arrest people and all these things. And anytime we use that force, and if a citizen have a question on why we used it, what were the circumstances, we have an obligation and a responsibility to answer that question. So don't, you know, like I said, there's a lot of attention on police conduct. There's a lot of attention on how we use force and do we use it on minorities more. Or so when, you know, part of this demanding accountability from departments across the country, that should be part of the demand. We want to know exactly we want to know the stats. How often do you use force? What's the breakdown? Is it higher than previous years? Is it going up? Is it going down? We kept those stats. We know exactly, you know, we know which officers use force more than other officers. We take action for those officers. So if we see this officer use force more than other officers, we bring them in to talk to them and figure out what's going on. So that, there are some checks and balances that go into play. It's not just that cops can go out here and just do whatever and just get away with it. Believe me, there are internal things looking exactly how they're using force, how often they use force, who they're using force against, what were the circumstances, all that.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right, man. People have no idea.
Is that shared with is that shared with the public, or they really have to ask questions to get that information, or should that be shared more?
In the city, the Fire and Police Commission, because it's shared with the Fire and Police Commission, it is shared with the Public Safety Committee when they ask and things like that. But is it generally just put out there to the public, other than to the Public Safety Committee? But
hey, Captain.
Yes.
In Wisconsin, do you like out here in California? We have a police officer's Bill of Rights, and so there's this whole other like barrier that, like with us, to kind of segue into that conversation. Do you guys, you can't just release everything about a police officer's conduct, and because it becomes also very, it can become misused. Information. So I don't know. Do you guys have that, like a Bill of Rights where officers, they can't just give the public everything they want about a police officer,
That's correct.
Including his home address?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
What?
Okay.
Oh, Craig,
Okay.
what you say, Craig?
There's just one more question on the there's just one more question on the chat. I'm sorry. It says, this is for Greg. Have you ever stepped over that blue wall of silence? It was regarding a conversation earlier. Have you ever stepped over that blue wall of silence to out those renegade officers? If not, do you feel a sense of guilt knowing how things are seen now?
You was a cop and a detective.
Yeah. There was not the blue wall of silence. I don't think in the sense that this is been asked. I do remember, on one occasion, and I remember this more often. I've thought about this a lot. I remember recovering a vehicle. A guy, we were chasing him. He crashed his car. He ran away. We never caught him, but it was a stolen car. And when we searched that stolen car, there was some money in there. I think it was like $300-400. And the following day, when I was doing my follow-up stuff, and I knew that $300 never got booked. I didn't know who took it, and it could have been anybody. But I didn't report that there was money missing because I didn't know who took it or if it was overlooked or whatever. And I've always thought that I have an idea. Like in my mind, I was like, I think I would know who might have done that, but I didn't know for sure. So that's like one regret where I look back and go, and I kind of overlooked, obviously somebody had taken some money from a recovered vehicle. But aside from that one particular incident, I don't remember ever going to court and perjuring, telling any kind of, misrepresenting anything on the stand ever once in my career. I do remember times when guys would get in, like we'd get into some type of, altercation in the street, some type of use of force. And then there's this big internal affairs investigation. Everybody's getting interviewed, and you only are trying to protect yourself. You're telling the story from the way that you saw it and understood it. I never sat and said, well, this person didn't do something when they actually did, or lied to protect somebody else. I was always going to be forthright because I was interested in protecting myself, and other people can answer for themselves and let it all kind of run its course. So a blue wall of silence was not something that I, practically dealt with in any kind of practical way.
So can I ask this question,
No.
Greg, for Greg and Andre, knowing that most people feel like there's the blue wall of silence. Have you ever, if either one of you, have you ever gotten on a partner or another officer and said, hey, you did the wrong thing, and said, you know, just letting them know that, hey, I seen what you did, I didn't like what you did, and I don't appreciate how you did it, and stepping up in that manner, where I feel like sometimes some officers don't speak up enough to say, hey, look, you know what you did was wrong, and you just stepping up to the plate and just, wrong is wrong, right is right, and knowing in your heart that guess what, you did the right thing, and letting that officer know that, you know, your partner, whoever, hey, look, don't cross that line with me no more.
I have an answer, but I don't want to hijack this. I'll defer to the captain. I do.
Greg, you can't do that. Come on, man.
Okay, so I was interviewing an informant who was also a homicide witness, and he was in prison at the time that I did this interview, and we were having a conversation, and he told me he was from a gang in one of the projects in South Central LA, and he was familiar with a community resource officer, an LAPD officer, that was becoming a little bit too friendly with a couple of narcotic suspects down there. And I thought, okay, well, maybe that's the way he does his job. You know, I'm not going to immediately, you know, criticize this, but he made a comment. He goes, I know for a fact that this guy has dimed off a search warrant, where we were going to do a search warrant. The LAPD was going to do a search warrant at a narcotic suspect's house, and the officer had tipped off the cop. And I didn't know if this was true. I'm just having an informant telling me that he believed it to be true, that this was something that he believed to be factual. And so, yeah, I reported it. I had recorded the conversation. I turned it over, and I knew the cop that he was talking about. I had worked with him, and I thought the world of him. I thought he was a great cop. And so I took all this with a grain of salt, but I still turned the information over and said, hey, this is, you know, may or may not be true, but this is what I'm being told by a reliable source. Go run with it. I don't know whatever happened with that, but I did turn it over because it was too important of a thing to overlook.
Andre?
Well, yes, to answer your question, yes. Once when I was a newer officer, I remember we got into this foot chase, and I didn't catch the guy, but you know, we were at the end of the chase together, and the officers all got there, and I remember this officer, she runs up, so they're on the ground, they're trying to arrest the guy or whatever, and this officer runs up and kicks the guy in the head. So I go, after it's all done, they get the guy in custody, and I go back to the station, and the sergeant said, well, you know, I want you to write a report on what happened out there, blah, blah, blah. So I did, wrote it up and said, yep. And at the end, this lady came up and she kicked him in the head. And the sergeant came to me and said, take that out of that report. I didn't ask that. I want to know about the arrest.
Oh, shit.
I was thinking like, wow, okay. But, you know, there were other incidents where we were up in the jail and some officer called it a monkey cage. And I took a real offense to that. And I went to him directly and told him I took offense to that. And he apologized profusely. But usually when you raise objection, number one, they won't do it around you again. They won't do it because they kind of, I don't know. And see, I think a lot of people look at it also, believe it or not, you know, when you say, well, how come, you know, all this stuff goes on and no one's turning in these bad officers? Well, guess what? It's like, I may be working with Greg. Greg's my partner. All day long, it's me and Greg. So we don't see anything. We don't see anybody else. It's just me and Greg. And so me and Greg are doing our job. We go to our DV. We go handle our drunken driver. We handle our accident and things like that. Nothing happens. It's a regular, boring old day. The deal where, like in the Rodney King incident, where you got about, you know, 10 officers down here, you know, those are rare. So when people say, well, you should have your partner. If this is what usually happens with my partner. So let's say we're trying to arrest somebody, or the person's getting is getting heated. The conversation is getting heated. Usually, the partner will step in and say, "Hey, let me handle it," and then you pass it off, and it's done. It never gets to a point of violence or someone being done wrong, because the partners kind of, they cover for each other. They look out for one another. So if I won't let my partner get in trouble, because if I fail my partner, meaning I'm not going to let him go out and break the law because he's going to get arrested and I failed him. I should have stopped him. And so that's how it's supposed to work. And in most cases, it does, but obviously not in all cases, because just as those officers out there, getting into trouble, the partner sometimes both of the officers get fired, the partner and the other one. But most of the time, we're independent contractors. We're out there, just us two. And the only time other officers come if we call for backup on something or crowd control. But most of the time, it's just one. A lot of times, we don't have a partner, so you're just out there by yourself.
I blame Denzel for it all. If he had not done Training Day, people wouldn't think that that's how it actually is.
Right, where you have to protect. Now you gotta keep quiet to protect your partner, because now you're gonna be involved in it, and it's just down the rabbit hole, right?
I remember watching that movie, and I got physically sick to my stomach. I'm like, "Oh fuck! People are gonna think this is how it is." Oh, jeez.
Oh, okay, that's a good question. How did you feel they portrayed you on the TV show?
Well, first of all, Josh Duhamel is just he's a genuinely good human being. He's just a down-to-earth guy. He's so not Hollywood. So he was great. But of course, they take so much artistic liberty. There was, a handful of things about that story that had to be modified just to have to kind of keep a flowing narrative. But it was cool. It was fun to work on. I wanted it to be a little bit more gritty. Like, I always thought that story is really a street. There's a lot of street in that story, and I don't know if it got conveyed in that show.
No, it didn't.
Yeah, I wish it would have.
Was it based off your book?
Yeah, well, yeah.
I thought it was based off your book.
It was. But once they buy the rights to it, they can do whatever they want with that story. And, I worked really closely with the executive producer, but then once the network gets a hold of it, they do it, they modify it for the audience that they want. And like, we were limited to like 4 F words per episode. And, and it's like, well, that's not that atmosphere, that environment. It's so much. Do you guys watch The Wire?
Right.
Oh yeah.
Like, to me, that's like the greatest police procedural show ever. Like, they really nailed it in as well as you can, in my opinion. What the environment was like. And I was hoping to do that same thing with the atmosphere that was going on with Death Row and with the Crips and the Bloods down in Compton. And I don't know that we fully captured it, but I was still really proud of the project. I mean, who wouldn't be? It was
Well,
cool.
How much of it was true based on what that really happened? How much of it was true?
All that was absolutely accurate. Like, the details about what happened in the murders were spot on. Like, there was no kind of like taking license with that. But just some of the life events. Like, I never smoked. They have me smoking in that show. I was never a smoker. And I never met Russell Poole, my counterpart at the LAPD. They have us meeting in the show. I never met him in my life. And little narrative things like that. But the details about the murders are exactly what happened in the investigation.
Yeah, I think they made it more character based instead of the whole, like, the gang influence. They focused in on the characters so you can get their stories and try to make it like a movie.
Yeah. Yeah. It was cool though.
Yeah.
Well, man, you saw the murder. Like I said at the beginning, nobody had a name or a face to who killed Tupac until you did your documentary. And to me, that make you the hip hop cop? How's the industry been treating you? Like, do they reach out and
Hey, so good. Like
be like,
really,
man,
honestly,
oh man,
I've
you saw Biggie and Tupac murder?
I swear, and it's very undeserved. Like I have met so many people and have developed really good, not only friendships, but ongoing relationships with people. And so, like Mob James, who was one of the guys over at Death Row, we're really, really close. And so through that process, I just met some really wonderful people, and we learned, I think, a lot from one another as far as what not the atmosphere, but just all the kind of nonsense that was going on that led to these completely avoidable deaths. That shit should never have happened. It was just horribly mismanaged by both.
Are you shocked that it took so long to get out? Because when I first heard what happened, and when I heard like what Tupac did at first, I kind of just tied it together. Like that seemed like a retaliation, but it was so like entrapped inside Los Angeles, like it got just kept there. And I bet everybody else around there knew, but it never got out past that.
Because the guys that knew were either involved or, on Biggie's death, there was only 3 people involved that we know of. There may have been a 4th. There could have been a spotter at the museum that night, but we don't know. But for sure, there's the shooter, Suge Knight, and then the girlfriend who, ran interference between the 2 of them. So that was a well-kept secret just because the only people that really knew for sure were, but Tupac's, everybody knew that. It was like the best-kept secret in Compton. Everybody knew the Crips had done that and that Orlando Anderson had retaliated for the beatdown at the MGM. So, but nobody was willing to come forward and cooperate insofar as the investigation went. Because, why would you? If you're a gangster from the streets, you're not going to walk into the police station and rat out your homeboys.
Right.
Hey, good interview. Thanks for your time, Mr. Greg Caden and Mr. Andre Williams. Your insight once again.
Yeah.
I hear some, but I'm still a street guy. I always feel like the police.
Go ahead, Craig.
I'm not in NWA or nothing, but I always feel like the police, should lead the pathway. You protect and serve. Y'all put it to protect and serve from the officer to the detective. I think you did all this great detective work solving down Tupac and Biggie murders. You could be solving them damn police who be out here, but I know they ain't gonna allow that to happen. But when Andre, he a damn captain, like, man, y'all are decent men. Like,
and because he's a captain, he's investigated cops. I guarantee you, he's already been in that position where he's holding them accountable. That's what he did. He managed his people. And in order to do that, you got to research them and investigate them and pull them in and hold them accountable.
Yeah, even close friends.
Detectives,
too.
I think, should do that too. But I know everybody got to go. Thanks for your time. Thanks for Maya, our student from UW Style, joining in. And did you have any other questions, Maya?
Nope.
You good?
Wait, actually, I do. I do actually. So Greg, I don't know who you are, but I just searched lead officer in Tupac and Biggie. Are you like actually the police officer who was involved with that, like solving that stuff?
I came on after the fact. Yeah, their murders were unsolved for a number of years, and so I didn't get involved till way beyond the original investigation. But then we formed a task force. Me and a group of other guys got involved, and were able to get people to confess their involvement. But a lot of time had gone by. Both the shooters and both murders were dead at that point, so prosecution became really impractical. But for all intent and purpose, it's solved, but it's unprosecuted. So that was just, it's bittersweet. It really is. It's bittersweet. And I just realized 2 things. I don't know your audience. I need to apologize for 2 things. A is that I have these hand-me-down rifles up here that are like 3rd generation from my grandfather. Please don't judge me because I have guns on me. And then when the I thought it was tight.
I thought it was tight
and then
too.
when when the psychologist was talking and she's like, and then there's marijuana, the gateway drug, I was going to get my little weed box out of here. It's like, I'm out of here. This has been awesome, though. So I hope you guys will have me back someday. And it's great meeting you, Captain.
Nice to meet you as well.
Appreciate it. Appreciate you both.
All right. God bless you all.
All
Gentlemen.
All right,
All right.
everybody.
Thank
Have a good
you.
one.
Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.